Emma Caldwell had always been the kind of person who made an impression. At 27, she had a sharp wit, an infectious laugh, and an uncanny ability to remember the tiniest details about people's lives. She worked as an accountant at Fairway Accounting in Charlotte, North Carolina. But she wasn't just a numbers person. She was a fighter. The last time anyone saw Emma was on a warm Friday night in July. She had just finished dinner at the Blue Lantern Diner with her best friend, Natalie Pierce. The two had laughed over old college stories, shared fries, and made plans to meet for coffee the next morning. Everything about that night seemed perfectly normal, until Emma walked out of the diner's glass doors and stepped onto 5th Street at 10:17 p.m. Security footage captured her moving confidently down the sidewalk, her floral dress swaying slightly in the breeze. She checked her phone, smiled at something, then slipped it into her purse. At the corner, she paused for the pedestrian light to change. Then she crossed the street and walked into the night. And that was it. No one saw her again. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. Natalie showed up at their favorite coffee shop, expecting to see Emma waiting with her usual caramel latte. But Emma never arrived. A few texts went unanswered, then calls. By noon, Natalie had a sinking feeling in her stomach. Emma was never late. By the time the sun set, Emma's parents had called the police. Her father, David Caldwell, was a retired firefighter, and her mother, Lisa, a schoolteacher. They knew their daughter was independent, but she wouldn't just disappear. Detective Mark Reynolds took the case. A seasoned investigator with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, he had seen cases like this before, but something about Emma's disappearance felt off. There were no signs of struggle, no frantic last-minute calls or texts. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist after leaving that diner. Then came the first clue. A pawn shop's security camera 2 blocks from the diner captured something eerie. A tall figure in a hoodie, keeping a measured distance behind Emma. Someone had been following her. Detective Mark Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the grainy security footage from the pawn shop's camera. The timestamp read 10:22 p.m., just minutes after Emma Caldwell was last seen leaving the Blue Lantern Diner. There she was, walking briskly down 5th Street. But she wasn't alone. A shadow moved behind her, a tall figure in a dark hoodie, staying just out of reach. The person never got too close, never did anything suspicious enough to raise alarm, but they were there, lurking, following. Reynolds felt the familiar weight of unease settle in his chest. Whoever this was, they were careful, experienced. This wasn't the sloppy work of an amateur mugger. Emma's best friend, Natalie Pierce, sat across from him in the dimly lit police precinct, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw the figure on the screen, she gasped. Oh my God! She was being followed. Reynolds nodded. Did she ever mention someone bothering her, a stalker, a co-worker acting strange? Natalie shook her head. No, I mean, Emma was smart. If she thought she was in danger, she would have told me. She would have... Her voice broke. The detective turned back to the footage. Emma walked past the pawn shop, then rounded a corner. The figure followed. But that was where the camera's view ended. Beyond that street, there were no more security cameras, no more witnesses. Emma had walked into a blind spot. Reynolds sent officers to canvass the area. They checked alleyways, dumpsters, even rooftops, but there was no trace of Emma. No blood, no dropped belongings, no scuff marks on the pavement. It was as if she had been plucked out of existence. Then, hours later, an officer called in with a grim discovery. Emma's phone had been found at an abandoned construction site 3 miles away. The screen was shattered, the case smeared with dirt. The last GPS signal had pinged there at 10:46 p.m., less than 30 minutes after she was last seen on camera. Reynolds picked up the battered phone with gloved hands. The implications were chilling. Emma had been taken, and someone had made sure she wouldn't call for help. Lisa Caldwell sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone with trembling hands. The screen displayed an unknown number, the voicemail time-stamped 3:17 a.m. With a deep breath, she hit play again. The message was brief, but it sent chills down her spine. A distorted, muffled voice whispered, "He was never yours to find." The voice was low, deliberate, almost mechanical, as if altered by a cheap voice changer. The call had come from a disposable burner phone, impossible to trace. Lisa clutched her chest. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Detective Mark Reynolds listened carefully, his jaw tightening. "It's a warning. Someone doesn't want us looking for Emma." Natalie, sitting beside Lisa, buried her face in her hands. "This is like a nightmare." Reynolds had dealt with ransom calls, hoaxes, even cryptic threats before, but this was different. There was no demand for money, no instructions, just a chilling declaration that Emma was gone. But gone where and why? He had his tech team analyze the audio for any background noise, hoping for a clue, a street sound, a passing train, anything. But the recording was eerily sterile, like it had been made in an empty room. Meanwhile, officers continued scouring the abandoned construction site where Emma's phone had been found. It was the skeletal framework of a future apartment complex, filled with half-built walls and piles of debris. Police dogs sniffed the area, searching for any trace of her. Then, just beyond the site's perimeter, they found something. A shoe, a delicate, tan-colored heel. It was Emma's. Natalie identified it instantly. She wore those to dinner. The discovery confirmed one thing. Emma had been at the construction site. But had she been alive when she got there? And if so, where was she now? As Reynolds drove back to the precinct, another question gnawed at him. The voice in the voicemail had said she was never yours to find. Did that mean Emma had been taken by someone who knew her? Then Natalie sat up suddenly. "Wait!" Emma had a stalker once, her ex-boyfriend, Ryan Greer. He wouldn't let her go, kept showing up places. What if it's him? Reynolds exhaled slowly. "Then it's time we pay him a visit." Detective Mark Reynolds pulled into the driveway of Ryan Greer's apartment complex, a modest building on the outskirts of Charlotte. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. He wasn't sure what to expect, but if Ryan had any involvement in Emma's disappearance, Reynolds wasn't leaving without answers. Ryan answered the door after the second knock. He was tall and wiry, with dark circles under his eyes and unkempt hair. His expression flickered with recognition, and then something else. Guilt? Fear? "What's this about?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Reynolds didn't waste time. "Emma Caldwell, she's missing." Ryan blinked, his face unreadable. I know, I saw the news." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "You want to come in?" Inside, the apartment smelled of stale beer and laundry detergent. Empty fast food wrappers littered the coffee table. Reynolds took in the mess, looking for anything suspicious. "When was the last time you saw Emma?" Ryan sat down, running a hand through his messy hair. "Couple months ago. We broke up in April. She didn't want to talk to me anymore." "That true?" Reynolds pressed. Brian sighed, nodding. "I messed up. I wasn't good to her. I kept showing up places, sending her messages. I didn't take the breakup well." "Define not well," Reynolds said, his voice flat. Ryan swallowed hard. "I never hurt her, if that's what you're thinking. I swear, I wasn't anywhere near her that night." "You have an alibi?" Ryan nodded quickly. "Yeah, I was at O'Malley's bar. The bartender knows me. I was there all night, watching the game. I didn't even leave until after midnight." Reynolds stared at him for a long moment. "We'll be checking that." As it turned out, Ryan wasn't lying. Security footage from O'Malley's showed him at the bar, nursing a beer and watching a football game. He never left during the time frame Emma disappeared. That meant one thing. Ryan wasn't the man in the hoodie. As Ryan walked Reynolds to the door, he suddenly spoke up. "Look, I know I wasn't great to Emma, but she told me something before we stopped talking. Something was off at her job. She was scared." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Scared of what?" Ryan shook his head. "She wouldn't say. But if you really want to find her, I'd start there." Detective Mark Reynolds stepped into the sleek lobby of Fairway Accounting, the company where Emma Caldwell had worked for the past 3 years. Everything about the office screamed professionalism. Polished floors, frosted glass walls, and the hum of quiet conversations. But beneath that pristine surface, something felt off. Emma's disappearance wasn't random, he could feel it. And if what her ex-boyfriend Ryan had said was true, that she had been scared of something at work, this was where the real answers lay. The receptionist, a nervous-looking woman in her 40s, gave him a tight smile. "Detective Reynolds, right? Mr. Whitman is expecting you?" Gerald Whitman, the firm's CEO, was a man in his late 50s with an expensive suit and the air of someone used to being in control. He shook Reynolds' hand firmly but didn't offer a seat. "Detective, this is a terrible situation. Emma was a valued employee. We all want her found." Reynolds studied him carefully. "When was the last time you saw her?" Whitman's smile was polite but forced. "That would have been Friday afternoon. She left around 5:30 p.m. Everything seemed normal." "Did she ever mention anything suspicious? Concerns about her safety?" Whitman hesitated just for a second. "Not to me. Emma was one of our best. Smart girl. Dedicated." Reynolds nodded but didn't break eye contact. "Do you mind if I take a look at her desk?" Whitman's jaw tightened ever so slightly. "Of course. Right this way." Emma's workstation was neat, almost too neat. A small framed picture of her family sat beside a stack of financial reports. Nothing personal, nothing out of place. But when Reynolds opened her desk drawer, he found something interesting. A yellow legal pad filled with handwritten notes. The words discrepancy, wire transfers, and 2.3 million jumped off the page. Reynolds' stomach tightened. Emma had stumbled onto something big, a financial crime. He looked up at Whitman, who had suddenly gone pale. "She was investigating something," Reynolds said slowly, watching for a reaction. "Something she wasn't supposed to find." Whitman forced a laugh. "Detective, I don't know what you're implying, but Emma was just an accountant. If she had concerns, she should have come to me." Reynolds closed the drawer, his instincts on high alert. Emma had found something that put her in danger, and someone had made sure she wouldn't talk. Detective Mark Reynolds gripped the steering wheel as he sped down the narrow road leading to Gerald Whitman's secluded cabin. The tension in his chest grew with each mile. The financial records had told the story. Whitman was embezzling millions, but Emma had figured it out, and now she was missing. When Reynolds confronted Whitman earlier that day, the man had cracked. "I don't know where she is," he stammered, his calm demeanor finally slipping. "But if she talked to anyone, they're in danger." It wasn't good enough. Reynolds had Whitman detained while his team dug deeper. They found a remote property under his name, an old hunting cabin deep in the woods, and when the police dogs sniffed something suspicious near the basement foundation, Reynolds knew they were close. The cabin loomed in front of them, its windows dark, the woods eerily silent. Reynolds and his team moved in, weapons drawn. The door was locked. Bam! A single kick sent it flying open. Inside, the place reeked of damp wood and sweat. Empty food wrappers and water bottles littered the small kitchen. Someone had been living here recently. Then, a sound. A faint, muffled noise. A whimper. Reynolds followed it to a heavy wooden door near the back of the cabin. A padlock dangled from the latch. Already broken. Someone had been here before them. He pushed the door open, revealing a dark, dirt-floor basement. His flashlight cut through the shadows, landing on a figure curled in the corner. Emma. She was bound at the wrists, her face bruised, her eyes wide with fear, until she saw Reynolds. Relief flooded her expression, and a broken sob escaped her lips. "We've got her," Reynolds called out, rushing to untie the ropes. Emma flinched as he touched her wrists. "He said no one would believe me," she whispered, voice hoarse. "He said it would all be covered up." Reynolds' grip tightened. Not this time. Minutes later, paramedics helped Emma out of the cabin. As she breathed in the cool night air, she finally felt safe. Whitman's empire was crumbling, and she was going to make sure he paid for everything he did. and as the sirens wailed in the distance, Reynolds knew justice was finally catching up.